fairly unique perspective on Taylor Swift, her art, and what it all means. And there are a lot of theories that I am operating under at any given time when I'm analyzing her and her work, and I think it may be confusing to newcomers. So this video is kind of me going over the grand theory of the things that I keep in mind, the theories that I have, the perspective that I view Taylor through. Basically, I observe and analyze Taylor through a theoretical perspective that includes everything I know about show business and its history, plus an absurdly close reading of Taylor's lyrics, and a belief that at this stage in Taylor's life, she is more than just a pop star. She is an all-around performance artist. In this house, we do Swiftcraft theories, and I constructed that term very deliberately because what Taylor does in her work is a combination of an art and a science. It is a craft. It is something that obviously is very artistic, but also at the same time, we know that it is very tactical, very strategic through songs like Mastermind and through interviews like, hey, can I drop Easter eggs 3 years in advance? Frankly, I find that for a lot of reasons, a lot of people do not analyze Taylor deeply enough because, frankly, they don't think highly enough about her. There is a lot of commentary and thoughts surrounding Taylor that do not think very highly of her, that view her through a very misogynistic lens, and also that view pop music overall as being kind of trivial and not being that deep. But when you have masters of songwriting like Paul McCartney appreciating her work, and you also have Ivy League universities that have entire courses that are dedicated to analyzing her work, there is clearly something deep there. Let's stop acting like it's a stretch that Taylor's referencing the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner now, shall we? Just because you haven't heard of something does not mean that Taylor has not. Even within the fandom, there are a lot of fans that for one reason or another look down on Taylor's intelligence or think that she has large blind spots when it comes to very specific things. And also, a lot of people get entirely too wrapped up about the men that they think these songs are about, and they don't focus nearly enough about Taylor and the songs that she's writing about her life, her family, herself. All of these things, I would argue, are more important than anything that she said about any man. Before we theorize, if you are the type of person who thinks that it is a stretch for Taylor to reference like a film from the 30s or a song from the 70s, this is not the channel for you. If you're the type of person that observes things and you're like, nah, it's not that deep, not the channel for you. We know that Taylor has a very wide breadth of media consumption across both decades and formats. We have fans who have made compilations of like every song, book, or movie that Taylor has referenced, and when you look at all of the stuff that we just know of that she has mentioned publicly in some form or fashion, you realize that she is very well read, that she listens to a lot of music, and that especially like she really likes a lot of older stuff. There's a lot of references in like, especially in her imagery, that go back to like the 30s, the 70s. Clara Bow was not the first time she referenced like the silent movie era, obviously. And I think what happens to a lot of people that try to theorize about Taylor online is like they try to start at a surface level and introduce things to people, but they get, oh, that's not that deep. Taylor doesn't know that. Oh, what are you thinking? And then they get stuck at that surface level. Like, there is so much deep down below the surface, and particularly if you perceive Taylor in a different way than they perceive Taylor, they can get very hostile. It's not that deep is a mindset that I am inherently opposed to. Pop music and other traditionally feminine art forms are very often overlooked in academia and in deeper study, and I refuse to do that. I'm going to do just brief introductions on this video because I do have a lot of theories to introduce, but if you want to see more in depth about one specific theory or more, please let me know down in the comments below. A caveat on truth and correctness. I call all of my thoughts theories because until or unless Taylor confirms something explicitly, either by a tell-all novel or an interview or something like that, we are theorizing. There are a lot of things that Swifties of all persuasions believe is fact or truth or we know it, when in reality, these are just common assertions that are made within that subsegment of the fandom, and if you go to another subsegment of the fandom, they probably think something entirely different. You can't even discuss the smallest man who ever lived with some segments of the population because they'll just go, it's just about Maddie, it's all about Maddie, it's only Maddie. But that interpretation is in no way officially confirmed by anything. That's just how those Swifties interpret that specific evidence. And a lot of theories that people treat as competing, like, oh, this song is about X person, so it can't be about Y person. Why can't it be about both? I think in many cases her songs are about multiple people and multiple subjects, and we're going to go into that deeper in my theories. And if the particular topic about how what we know about Taylor Swift is wrong is interesting to you, I've done an entire video on it, so I'm not going to belabor that point here. But I find theorizing for theorizing's sake fun. It's not so much right or wrong, it's just, is there evidence to support this? Is there not evidence to support this? And a lot of the theories that I have a lot of evidence to support them. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're true. Now to the theories. There are a lot of theories that I operate under, but the number one biggest is the competent Taylor theory, and that basically is, I believe that Taylor is competent. I believe that the large majority of the time, if she makes a reference and it's something that I can simply Google, it was probably deliberate. Taylor has a lot of time when she's on private jets flying around where she can be listening to songs, watching YouTube videos, perusing Wikipedia. She seemingly has a lot of insomnia based on the In Midnight's album, or at least it seems like she's up a lot late at night. She has a ton of time to research. Specifically, if she's going to use something very prominently, like a big symbol that she's using a lot, or like a song title or an album title, I'm assuming she knows at least what the first page of Google says about those things. If she herself has not researched those things, other people on her team have. Taylor also exists in the context of celebrity. She's not like you and me. She can get from one side of the world to the other in 13 hours. There are a lot of things that she's capable of that we are not capable of. She uses PR. In fact, she is one of the best in the world at it. And it's not saying that she is not talented and capable. It's just in Hollywood, it is not enough to be competent and capable. And the only way that you get up to the top is by utilizing PR. Taylor is not too big for PR. Taylor is as big as she is because she has learned to wield PR in a masterful fashion, and pretending that she doesn't actually is ignoring one of the skills that she is the best at. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like she doesn't occasionally call back grit on herself. Storyteller or Troubadour theory. Taylor Swift learns through other people's stories and she teaches through her own story. And this is something that she doesn't bring up or bring to the light too much, because especially during folklore, she had kind of tried to bring up things like parables, and it really seemed like people didn't necessarily get it or understand it. It definitely seems like whenever Taylor takes her job or her art too seriously, you have a bunch of people that are coming to be like, no, it's not that serious, you're just a pop star. But she talks about folklore and parables and other ways that we educated and elevated a populace before most people were literate. Taylor clearly understands that the songs that she writes are going to have an impact on people. Jim Carrey once said, the effect you have on others is the most valuable currency you possess. And a lot of famous people go into like motivational speaking, or they go into dare, but like, people don't really learn well from that. People don't learn well from, don't do this, this is bad, you're gonna suffer consequences if you're gonna do that. People don't like feeling like they're being lectured to. But what does work is if you tell people stories like, hey, this is what I did, these are the circumstances, this is what happened to me, like these are the consequences, and that makes people like, wait, if Taylor Swift can do that and Taylor Swift can have those consequences, I could do that and I might suffer those consequences too. Like the best example that I can think of on this is All Too Well. If Taylor got up on a podium and she talked about all of the ways that these age gap relationships that she was in early in her career hurt her, people would not listen nearly as much as they have listened to All Too Well. And especially in the light of All Too Well 10-minute version, a lot of people that are like myself who didn't necessarily realize when the first one came out that we had been hurt in similar ways by similar relationships. Like there were a lot of millennials when that album, when Red, Taylor's version came out, that really reflected on a lot of our relationships in a totally different light. And that's something that can really help a lot of people start in the process of healing, because the first part of healing is realizing that things that happened to you were bad, that you didn't deserve them, that you didn't do anything wrong, and it was the other people in the scenario that caused that pain. Like that is the first step of realizing that you need to heal and starting that healing process. And I think a lot of her music is about healing from the pains of like cis heteronormativity and the typical relationship standards that a lot of women are put under, and the way it's very often not fair. But I did a 45-minute long video on All Too Well, so if you want to hear all of my thoughts on that, I go into them in quite detail there. Spiral Alice theory. I believe that not only has Taylor used her heart rate and her breathing to great effect in her songs, but she has also brought our attention to the fact that she is doing that, such as crediting Spiral Alice on the credits of You're Losing Me, and also making that Spiral Alice playlist. I don't know who originally decided that Spiral Alice could be an anagram for capillaries, capillaries being the sound of her heartbeat, but there's obviously songs on TTPD where she does that as well. And I have a couple of theories as to what she's trying to do with that. Like specifically with the song So Long London, I believe that it's an auditory simulation of a panic attack. And more broadly, I believe a lot of the heart rate and breathing signs that are used in TTPD are used to A, make us mirror how she was feeling in those moments, but also to take us through a specific emotional journey on each of the individual songs. A lot of people, when listening to music, their heart rate is going to match the beat of the music, and also if we hear breathing signs, we can subconsciously match that respiration, and that can kind of push us through the same like physiological responses that Taylor was going through, either when she was feeling those emotions or performing those songs or what have you. As for So Long London, that is a bit longer of a theory. I don't have a video on it yet, but it's probably going to be my next video on Taylor, unless she does something crazy in the next few days. I'm working on finishing that one up, but it's kind of a longer one. My TTPD corollary. A sub-theory that I have about TTPD is that it's designed to be consumed as a whole, as an emotional journey. Now, I think in part that's how it works forward, but I think this is most prominent when you listen to the album in reverse track order. So when you start at the very end of the anthology and work your way back up the tracks. And I do have a playlist for that because that's a playlist that I use in another one of my theories. We'll get to that later. But when you just listen to that album in reverse track order and shut out the entire rest of the world, it really does take you on a very evocative emotional roller coaster, and it's one of the ways I think the album is best consumed. There has been an uptick in research recently on the physiological impacts that music can have on our bodies, and Taylor and the people that she collaborates with are all music nerds. I'm sure that either Taylor or Aaron or Jack knows of these studies and utilizes that in producing Taylor's songs, if Taylor doesn't know that herself. And I believe this is one of the things that makes that album so evocative, particularly to people who really give it a deep listen and think about it, and think about the similar circumstances they've been in their own lives. Taylor Spliff Corollary. I'm gonna have to use careful language on this one because the algo. When consuming grown-up gummies and TTPD at the same time, I realized that this might actually be an intended way of consuming the album too, especially when you're elevated and you consume the album in reverse track order and you just really let it take you over. It's a particular journey, and there have been suspicions that Taylor might dabble in some things for a while. And we know that she's been to some parties where she's dabbled in some things. It wouldn't surprise me if there were considerations made for people who will also listen to the album. That's all I'm saying. Mantra theory. Taylor knows more than most the power of words, and more so than that, she knows the power of words that you say over and over and over again, words that you scream at the top of your lungs, especially words that you scream at the top of your lungs when surrounded by hundreds, if not thousands of fans. Those words have powerful meaning. And I believe that especially with TTPD, she has used this to give a lot of her songs extra emotional resonance. When we scream, sing along to things like "The best people in life are free," "I cry a lot but I'm so productive," "F the patriarchy," "Who's afraid of little old me," that has an impact on us. And if you have trauma, especially CPTSD, and you scream, sing along to TTPD a few times, like I said, it does have a beginning entry-level healing effect. It's not going to fix everything that's wrong, but it's going to get you a journey of starting. The number of me and my friends that were like having conversations after TTPD where we're like, "Hey, did you realize this about that in your life too?" Yeah, I did. I really realized a lot of things about my life. Unknown Taylor. This is something that I kind of introduced in the beginning with one of my caveats, but I want to introduce it as a more specific theory. We do not actually know what Taylor's private life looks like. I know that a lot of people believe they do, but we don't. I constantly remind people that are getting too attached to the Travis and Taylor narrative that for 6 years we believed that everything was happy hunky-dory in Taylor and Joe land, and that they were going to buy a house together and they were going to get married if they hadn't secretly gotten married already, and they were going to have babies and if they hadn't secretly had babies already. And then what we found out after they broke up through the writing date of You're Losing Me, if You're Losing Me is in fact about Joe, it would have happened several years before the end of their relationship. But if you really listen to like the lyrics in her songs, a lot of her lyrics hint at relationships that are not super happy all the times, relationships that are up and down, on and off. There is one narrative that goes out to the media and keeps Taylor in the headlines and keeps people looking at the lyrics to see deep, dark secrets about these men. They're hidden in those lyrics. And then when you look at those lyrics and you look at the interviews that Taylor's talking about those lyrics, like Taylor talking about Folklore and Evermore, she was talking about how sad and lonely she was when she was stuck at home with her boyfriend. Like, yeah, all of us were sad and lonely during them, but no one was sad and lonely the way Taylor was. When you look at the headlines versus the songs that she was writing at those specific times, it's very discordant. It does not match. Taylor constantly contextualizes and recontextualizes her life, her art, everything with us. She is an unreliable narrator who admits to lying to her audience. And she also admits to altering certain details too, such that the person that the song is about will know that the song is about them, but not the mass media and everybody else. When Taylor says, "I can show you lies," when Taylor says every bait and switch was a work of art, when Taylor says, "and so I changed your name and any real defining clues," those acts are not isolated to the songs that they exist in. We have to assume that there are other occasions, possibly many other occasions, when these things are happening. And because of this, it is very difficult to ascertain anything specific about Taylor for certain. And like, that's kind of the fun for me. And whenever this is brought up, you have a lot of people who make the argument that a lot of fans would be so angry if they realized that the media narrative wasn't actually the truth and that Taylor was lying about her relationships to them. But she has, she does, she is. Just because those people are choosing not to listen to her doesn't mean that she's not doing it. Later in this video, I'm going to discuss the theory of brand Taylor versus Taylor, the actual literal human. And this is one of those big points where those things are often in opposition to each other. And that's why we have so much mental illness displayed in TTPD, IMO. Synchronicity. I believe that Taylor's work is more connected to film than a lot of people realize. I think a lot of people don't take her film aspirations very seriously, even though she's hinted at it for many years. And I do believe that TTPD is designed as a soundtrack of sorts for the film Dead Poets Society. When you watch the film alongside the album, again in reverse track order, because in the manuscript she says, I don't remember the line about starting at the end and moving back forward, but for me, I watched it that way because I'm obsessed with watching Wizard of Oz alongside Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. That synchronicity, it's not intentional, they didn't mean it that way, but it's fascinating to me, and for a while I have suspected if Taylor does the same thing. And because she was so heavily referencing Dead Poets Society with this album, and especially with the Fortnite music video, I assumed that there had to be something there. And once I started talking to other people about this theory, I realized that there are people that have a similar theory about Midnights and the Disney Alice in Wonderland film. And it really has me wondering if she's done similar things with other albums and we've just never really realized it. Like, in general, I don't believe her theorists give her enough credit, especially when it comes to like things like 30s cinema. And it does make sense for her to do something like this because this is something that she can take towards film production companies and be like, look, I have scored a film, this is what I'm capable of, let me score your film. As for TTPD and Dead Poets Society, I've done an entire video on that theory too. Unfortunately, it didn't get nearly as much attention as I would hope because it has a lot of copyrighted material, so it got suppressed heavily, but that is probably one of the most impressive things that I believe Taylor has done. The song Robin comes on when Robin Williams' character is first introduced, and especially in the context of Robin Williams no longer being with us, it felt like a tribute. It felt like a eulogy almost. Performance Artlor. This is one thing where I'm going to say that, like, I don't think this is a theory. I think this is just what Taylor does. And a lot of other theorists have picked up on this one. So performance art is art that takes place in the real world. And a lot of times the artist will use their own body or the bodies of themselves and friends to prove a specific point, to further a particular narrative, something along those lines. And I really love performance art. I think it's really fascinating for a number of reasons. And I kind of saw Taylor as a performance artist before I really got into her music, because I saw everything that she was doing with her eras, having like a comprehensive aesthetic, and every time you see her during that era, she's wearing something from that aesthetic. Like, that in and of itself is performance art. And more as I got to learn about her and realize what she does, I realized that, like, basically every time we see her, she's doing performance art. When you control when you're seen, what you're wearing, who you're seen with, to the degree that Taylor is, that is a form of performance art. Curating her image, curating how the mass media and how the public sees her is a performance art. And it's a performance art that I think a lot of women do, but Taylor does it very obviously. When we have seen Taylor since Reputation era, we haven't seen her in her sweats just running to get a coffee. We haven't seen her all sweaty leaving the gym, right? And having an aesthetic and controlling that aesthetic is one of the things that makes, like, a pop singer elevate so fast. Like, that's one of the reasons that Chappell Roan has blown up as fast as she has. Like, the way that she commits to the aesthetic bit, It's something Sabrina Carpenter does well. It's something Olivia Rodrigo does well. Like, a lot of pop stars are doing performance art, and it's not being taken seriously broadly by and large because it's a bunch of women doing stuff with their clothes, and we don't really take that stuff seriously. I think there are a lot of ephemeral aspects of being famous, especially being famous while female, that Taylor and these other pop stars have really mastered and been able to capitalize on. When you send a subtle message with your outfit, with your accessories, there is a narrative that is being spun, that is going on. And again, I believe more broadly, if things that were associated with women and femininity were taken more serious societally, we would like have tons of college courses devoted to this stuff. Like, I believe that we barely break the surface in terms of the level of storytelling that Taylor provides through a variety of means, both through the narrative every time that she's paparazzi'd somewhere. Like, all of these storylines are going on, and the reason Taylor is so successful is because she's writing most of them. I especially believe we barely break the surface of how Taylor signals with her clothing. As somebody who used to be very associated with the Met and the Met Gala, Taylor knows better than most people how women have historically used their clothes to send signals to one another, to send signals to others. Women embroidered maps into their gowns. They tracked seasons and menstruation and crop rotations via beaded and sewn details because often men didn't pick up on those things. It is another one of the many avenues of exploration that I think very often get cut off too soon with Taylor. And as for why she doesn't advertise herself as such, I think this goes back to, again, why she doesn't advertise herself as a storyteller, because anytime she publicly takes her work too seriously or infers that there's like deeper levels of meaning other than just like the dude she's been with and their terrible traits, and you have headlines like Taylor Swift's quarantine folktales, Swift's latest folklore really is about being a sad rich person stuck at home. People don't get it when she tries to like be explicit about the message. She has to be subversive to get her message across. And we know that performance art is on her radar because, like I said, Salvador Dali, but also I would make the argument that Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton going out and performing arguments in hotel rooms with thin walls so that the media could hear about their tumultuous relationship and report back to it to their eager fans. Like, a lot of stuff involving PR is a form of performance art too. And that relationship in specific was not just Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton's relationship. Their fans were very invested in it as well, the way that Taylor's fans are often invested in her relationships. And Taylor references Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton a lot, very specifically to make a point, I'm sure. And I do think she's breaking out of this a bit. I do think that video that we got of her with Olivia at the stadium for Miami is a symbol that we may be back to her millennial cat posting and not having like a heavy media strategy for everything that she does on the internet. But when you really look at her and you look at her life and things like that, you realize we don't see that much of her. There is a lot of time that Taylor is unaccounted for and could be doing anything. She could have an entire family life in the time that we don't see her. Because a lot of times what will happen is she'll go out late Sunday night and there'll be pictures all over Twitter on Sunday, and then there'll be headlines all over the news Monday, and then her friends will show pictures from that event on their Instagrams later in the week, so we'll get more pictures from that event. But we're only seeing Taylor one day. Like, especially when Eras Tour is not in session, the number of weeks that we maybe get one Taylor sighting, and that's expanded to fill several days in a week press. And I think something I don't hammer on enough is the fact that, like, Taylor is really good for SEO. The news media wants to have an article about Taylor every week, if not every day, if possible, because that gets clicks. And they're gonna run something whether or not they have important, good, interesting news about her or not. And like I said, this is one of the reasons that I believe that she utilizes this, like, relationship PR to keep the media full of benign things to say about her, so they don't look more deeply into things like her real private life and the actual people that she cares about and things of that nature. And whenever I say this, I have people like, well, what about the paparazzi? Well, what about the holiday house party? I cannot stress enough that very often Backgrid is called by one of the people in the picture, if not one of their teams. There are very few locations where there are just paparazzi stationed. Like, sure, there's like Nobu and there's like LAX where there might be paparazzi at a fairly big amount of the time. But the places that Taylor is photographed at, like that place in the middle of nowhere, Italy, it was so secluded, and she could have had all the privacy in the world, but she and Travis sat out front, and somehow a photographer found out that they were there in the first place. That's not a place that the paparazzi are just gonna be. And that party that she threw at Holiday House, like, Taylor has multiple houses. She can invite her friends to any house that she wants. She can rent an Airbnb in the middle of nowhere. She can throw it at one of her friends' houses. The choice to have a party at Holiday House in the middle of peak beach tourism season, and a lot of times when she's at her house, I've heard that they do close off the beaches around her area, and the day that that party was photographed, people from the area were saying that the beach wasn't closed the way that it usually is. I don't want to bog this video down with a deep, in-depth discussion of performance Artlor, so if you want to hear more about that, just let me know in the comments below. TTPD's biggest bait and switch, in my personal opinion, is convincing anyone that that album was really about any of the men that she's been with, when in reality, a lot of what that album has been about is the things that Taylor sacrificed to be as famous as she is, and whether or not she feels like it was the right decision. Taylor knows that we will voraciously read lyrics if the songs are allegedly about the men that she has been with, but if she says that those songs are about facets of her personality or her struggles or stuff like that, again, it just gets brought up to, oh, Taylor's a spoiled little rich girl. Taylor has to keep multiple narratives going because there are some people that just do not care about her. And unfortunately, a lot of them call themselves Swifties. A lot of Swifties are only interested in the men in Taylor's life and the things that are associated with them, those men, and try to associate literally everything. Like, I've seen people try to say that Marjorie is about a man in her life. Like, Taylor is one of the most talented female performers of all time, and to see her work consistently get brought back to just the men that it's about is really discouraging, to be quite honest. Venn diagram or multiple subjects theory. Taylor very much seems to love to have multiple layers of meaning to almost all of her songs, especially on the past 6 albums. A lot of people will interpret Taylor's lyrics, find a single layer of meaning, and then they'll move on. Okay, it's solved. We know what the song's about, guys. I don't really think that's actually how it works. I think that's very short-sighted. Like, one thing that we really have to keep in mind is that Taylor has been writing songs since she was 14, and like, she didn't originally start writing songs so she could put them on albums and become famous. It seems like she was writing songs initially as an emotional outlet, as a form of coping, as a way for her to get feelings that were stuck inside of her out. It is how she processes her feelings, it's how she understands what she's feeling, it's how she gets her feelings out. It is not just her job, it is also something she loves doing. And it seems very obvious to me that if you've made this many albums in your life, this many songs in your life, it's probably kind of boring, kind of old hat, kind of whatever to just make a song about one thing. Trying to add multiple layers of meaning to every song, every lyric, every nuance, it's something that makes the process more interesting for her, yes, but it is also something that makes the song last longer in our minds. It's something that makes us keep thinking about the song. Like I said, one of the things that I call this theory is Venn diagram theory, because in my mind, how I envision her making some songs, like the song Robin, for example, I believe that that song may not only be about like multiple people named Robin, but also possibly literary figures, maybe the literal bird. And like, if I was her, how I would do this is I would set up a Venn diagram of like the people that I want this song to be about. I think some of the theories behind Robin are Robin Williams. Obviously, I mentioned the tie-in with Dead Poets Society. Robin Desner, that's Aaron Desner's son. I think that's just something that fans have really made up, but I think that's possibly true. I've never seen Taylor or Aaron attribute that song as being about Robin in any way, but I also think it's about the Shakespeare character, Robin Goodfellow. And like I said, if you watch Dead Poets Society while you're listening to TTPD, you'll notice that the song Robin links up with Robin's character's introduction, yes, but also the character Neil from Dead Poets Society portrays Robin Goodfellow in A Midsummer's Night Dream at the very end of the film. And what I think she may have done in this case is write down Robin Williams traits, Robin Goodfellow's traits, and those areas where there was overlap, that's where she writes the song from. And sure, you could probably include Aaron Desner in that as well. And I think when you take that perspective, that she may be writing not just about one subject, but about the commonality between multiple subjects, it makes a lot of her songs more interesting. And an extension of this is what I call the composite muse, or a muse that is made to look like one muse, where in actuality it's multiple different muses. And she could do this for a number of reasons. Like, it could be just to simplify it. If she had multiple relationships that made her feel a certain way, it's kind of weird to have extra characters in a song, although she does do it from time to time. For example, I suspect the line, "In the age of him, she wished she was 30 and made coffee every morning in a French press," is actually in relationship to both Jake and John, in addition to possible muses behind the scenes that we don't know about. Like, you need to remember that especially when she was starting her early career, she was taking a lot of flack for dating around a lot. And realistically, her dating around a lot is not something that would raise an eyebrow, I think, nowadays. We were just in peak slut-shaming era, so it was like once she had dated 3 men, it was basically like, okay, come on, you've dated 3 men and you haven't settled down yet. Clearly there's something wrong with you. But during that initial period of Taylor's career, Taylor was talking a lot about how she loved falling in love with love, and like that was more interesting to her than marriage. And that's not to mention the fact that anybody who is associated with Taylor in any way gets an enhanced level of scrutiny, but the closer they are to her, especially like romantically or as her friends, the more those people reflect back on her. And there are obviously some people that she's probably been associated through over the years that she has not wanted to have that close of an association with, even though they may have been doing the hanky-panky on the side. I also am not oblivious to the fact that Taylor is one of the most gorgeous, rich women alive. Like, if I was her, I don't necessarily know that I would be in a hurry to settle down either. But that enhanced scrutiny that people that are close to her get is often something that makes her relationships more difficult. There are always going to be fans that have a strong negative opinion, regardless of whether or not that person is actually good or evil or not. But that's very difficult to put on people, and especially when you're in the early stages of a relationship, or especially if you're in like a queer relationship or something like that. There is a lot of reasons for somebody in Hollywood to conceal those relationships. Muse plus Taylor, but also more so than songs just being about like 2 different people, I think sometimes the songs are about both the Muse and Taylor, or about multiple facets of Taylor's personality. I think sometimes Taylor writes from her own perspective, right? But sometimes she also writes from the perspective of her lover. And there's a variety of reasons to do that. I do think, especially when she's talking about things that are maybe more negative that she does, that occasionally she frames them as potentially being something that the man in that song or the man in that relationship did. Like some examples. The song Exile, I believe that one of the parts is Taylor and one of the parts is her muse. I'm not necessarily sure which. I go back and forth depending on the day of the week, but that's what I believe that song is. One of my theories about The Smallest Man Who Ever Lived is that it's probably about Scooter Braun and Scott Borchetta, but also to a degree the aspects of Taylor's personality that mirror those men's personalities. And in fact, one of my broader theories about TTPD is that the Bolter, the Albatross, and the Black Dog are not only just like muses in Taylor's life. I believe they are the aspect of Taylor's personality that muse mirrors, or that muse reminds her of or reflects. And I believe that sometimes her songs aren't about other people at all. They're about warring aspects of Taylor's own personality. Alien Taylor. I think a lot of other theorists have a theory along this vein, either a monster or a zombie theory, and I know that I pull primarily from Ty Wilson's like zombie Taylor theory, and a lot of other people have had like zombie Taylor themes after Wildest Dream. Regardless, my twist on that, Taylor has been famous ever since she's very young, and that means the life she has been thrusted into is very different than the lives you and I are thrusted into. And also, she wasn't born for that life, right? She's not a nepo baby who was prepared to be famous since birth. This is something that roughly midway through her adolescence, her and her parents decided, okay, we're going to try and make this a famous thing, and the life that they initially raised her for was not the life that she grew up and went into. Beyond that, we cannot relate to being perceived by the number of people Taylor is perceived by day after day, year after year, end on end. We cannot relate to having our masters stolen out from under us. We cannot relate to our management telling us who we can date, who we can spend time with. We can't relate to our parents and our brother also kind of being our management, and it's a very family business. We cannot relate to having literally every single moment of our lives dissected, and we definitely can't relate to everything we do potentially inspiring legions of our fans to do the same, and legions of our fans being a lot of young women and children. But despite all of these pressures Taylor has that we don't share, Taylor is known for her relatability. She needs to tell her story that features many unrelatable elements in a relatable way that we can digest, that we can have value off of, that is not going to just be, oh, spoiled little rich girl. It can't be dismissed that easily. Taylor makes metaphors so that we can understand things, and one of the metaphors that she uses the most is relationships, romantic relationships. One of the things that Taylor has said in the Champagne Problem speech is that she gets a lot of validation from writing a song, putting her feelings out into the world, and then performing those songs in front of her audience and seeing her fans reflect back those emotions. If we can't relate to the exact circumstances that she's been, we can at least relate to the emotions and validate that aspect of it. I think a lot of us have had our pains gaslit away, and Taylor is no exception to that. It's not that big of a deal. You're making a big deal out of nothing. Don't be a sissy. Don't be a girl. We go through so much of that when we are hurting, but a lot of those things that we are being told shouldn't hurt, we shouldn't care about, they shouldn't impact us, are actually things that do cause hurt, that are hurting us, that are causing a problem in our lives. And these people that are dismissing those feelings are making it impossible for us to get any type of validation and therefore healing. And that's validation and affirmation that goes both ways, from Taylor to her fans and vice versa. Taylor frequently uses romance and romantic relationships to explain inherently alien concepts to her fans, like having your master's heist stolen and being perceived at all times. She uses business as a metaphor for romance, and romance as a metaphor for business. And this isn't necessarily something that she started herself. Like, I would argue that she got this from her parents when her father made that like birth announcement thing that was a stock trade certificate. There's an obvious focus that was present in the early stages of Taylor's life. And because of this, we really can't assume just because she's describing a relationship in her songs that what she's actually describing is a relationship. I think she also uses sci-fi and abduction references to refer to relationships, whether they be romantic or not, that are inherently controlling and suppressive. And I do go into this more in depth in my video on sci-fi themes in the song Down Bad. Taylor as a man, or Taylor as the man. One of the things that I pointed out before TTPD is that Taylor was exclusively referring to herself with masculine terms. She was the chairman. And in the lead up to TTPD, there were other people and fans that were related to as chairperson or chairwoman, but Taylor was always the chairman. So this is something that we have seen her explicitly acknowledge with songs like The Man, but we have also seen her less explicitly acknowledge this with songs like The Teenage Love Triangle, when Taylor being James. And I don't believe that these are the only times that we have seen parts of Taylor's personality distilled into the masculine in her songs and her lyrics. I mean, obviously with The Man, she was very clear with that song. If I did everything the same, how would it be perceived if I was a man? And there are a lot of people that do not look at that as a list of things that Taylor acknowledges doing, even though she's explicitly confirmed that. And I think there's a lot of reasons that Taylor does this, but two of the major are, Taylor's first publicist gave her this like good girl image that she kind of had a struggle to conform to, and like an excessively good girl image. This is the era when a lot of the Disney stars were wearing purity rings, and I'm glad that Taylor never got involved in that, because a lot of the performers that were wearing purity rings have said that, you know, it did not necessarily the most healthy things to their thoughts about like sexual relationships and things of that nature. And once you have that image of being a good girl, it is hard to do bad things. Once people have an image of who they think you are, if you do things that are in defiance of that image, it is taken a lot more poorly than if a bad person does yet another bad thing. And Taylor was plagued by this squeaky clean, perfect good girl reputation. And this is why we see so many Disney starlets go through like their kind of wild child era, because they have to go from being like a good Disney kid to being like an actual adult with like needs and feelings and stuff like that. And part of this like good, squeaky clean Disney image that we have is this idea that they're all gonna be like virginal. None of these teenagers are having sex or sexual thoughts. None of us believe that. And even with everything that went down with Reputation and embracing that kind of bad girl image, there is still a predominant like Taylor has to be a good girl, has to be a good person thing, and that prevents her from acknowledging certain things in her lyrics, I think. Or at least until very recently. The standard for how Taylor is perceived, unfortunately, has always been very different than even pop stars who were otherwise very similar to her image. But like I said, we started getting these admissions through the narrative device as the man in the song The Man, and we saw these themes continue into songs like Antihero and Mastermind, where Taylor's admitting like, hey, there are things that I'm doing on purpose, behind the scenes. And I think one of the problems with having this lens of a male avatar is that a lot of her friends didn't really get it, and a lot of her fans blamed men that she has been associated with in the past for doing things that it possibly seems that Taylor did herself. Like a huge group of fans were really quick to assign the blame of chase two girls, lose the one to one of Taylor's exes. But if James is Taylor, it wasn't one of her exes that did that. Time Travelor. I believe a good number of Taylor's songs are her talking to a past version of herself. I think one of the best examples of this is You're on Your Own, Kid, but I definitely think there's others as well. And I do think that Taylor spends a lot of time thinking about the person that she was in the immediate lead up to when she was famous. I think that's why she spends so much time dwelling on high school and school romance and stuff like that. I think another element of it is it was the last time that her path and our paths were vaguely on the same course. Like, after high school, Taylor was on a very different path than most of her fans were. This was the last time that we could truly have a one-on-one like relation with her. This was before she had to make every decision with this concept of Taylor the brand and all of her fans and what could happen in her mind. Two Taylors, brand Taylor versus Taylor the actual human being. I don't honestly know who was the first person to propose this. I know it's a theory that a lot of people have had for a while though, and I'm one of them. There have been theories, at least since the Wildest Dream video, about there being this concept of two versions of Taylor. The Taylor that is the perfectly perfected image of a pop star, that is who everyone thinks she is, versus the real person with flaws underneath. And the problem is, when you have one thing that has to be perfect and one thing that is by definition flawed, they are always going to be at odds with each other. There's always going to be a competition of, do we show perfect or do we show imperfect? Now, a lot of us do believe that Taylor is presently on the course of destroying Taylor Swift the brand, and that is why she has said, like, after the Eras tour is over, the Eras era is over. Basically, the era of her putting on fronts to sell as many copies as possible is going to go away. And as for why she's continuing to maintain both of these identities despite it causing her pain, I think we need to look back at the re-records and how a lot of people didn't think they were going to be financially viable in the beginning. It is very difficult to convince people to purchase things that they've already purchased. And it is definitely difficult to convince people to purchase things they've already purchased to a degree that, like, you can profit off of it. When she originally said she was going to do this, most people in the industry thought it was going to be a fool's errand. So Taylor had to decide upon a way to advertise this to people, and obviously the Eras tour is part of that, but also the PR that she does with her relationship is part of that as well. She wants people to be involved in the experience of everything that's happening with Taylor right now, right? Because there are a lot of people that are just getting interested in Taylor right now because of all of the interest around her, right? Like, my neighbor wasn't super interested in her music in the past, but because everyone she knew was talking about Taylor, thinking about Taylor, analyzing Taylor, she really listened to TTPD more than she probably would have in the past. And she's not the only one. Getting Taylor in front of these NFL dads, brads, and chads is an untapped market. It's people that have not previously purchased her albums, who are giving her music a chance, who are trying her music for the first time, who are actually listening to the lyrics for the first time, who are realizing that she's talented for the first time. And that is an entirely untapped market that makes it easier to sell these Taylor versions to people. Basically, she has needed to grow her image as big as humanly possible such that she can make this financially viable, such that it makes sense to do it. And that is something that she has, at least in part, leveraged the media frenzy around her relationship with Travis in order to do. Everything around her feels so monumental right now that people want to be a part of it. The downside to this, and there is a big one, is that she has had to shrink down real Taylor in order to boost up brand Taylor. And at the same time, she has to prepare those fans of hers that are going to be, like, taken aback by this, you know, brand Taylor going away. She needs to start to generate a genuine connection with those people by hinting at who the person behind the brand is. Like, everything that she's doing right now is such a masterful juggling of two separate and disparate images and persona, and it's like, in years from now, when people are finally able to look at her more objectively and stop, like, being ridiculous, this is going to be looked at as one of the greatest media spectacles of all time, one of the greatest marketing principles of all time. But I think that's why she's going so many extended periods without us seeing her at all right now. Keeping that mask on has got to have a cost. Supernova Theory. And I can't remember who came up with Supernova Theory. I believe it's under the Pink 7, but please correct me if I'm wrong. But basically this theory is that Taylor is trying to grow her star so big that it has to go supernova, and that it blows up, and that all that is left in its wake is Taylor, the real, actual human being. And a lot of people who believe the supernova theory believe that her star is being blown this big so that it has to explode, and then that will be like the Reputation 2.0, like her reclaiming her reputation as who she actually is as a person. And I'm not sure that she intends for it to be like that aggressive or that violent, but I do think it's an interesting theory. There's also Yellow Brick Road theory, which is the theory that the Eras tour is kind of like the Goodbye Yellow Brick Road tour that Elton John went in the 70s before he originally came out as bi. And Ren has done a lot more research on Elton John and the Goodbye Yellow Brick Road tour than I have, so I'm kind of spouting this based on what she has said, so I'm not an expert on this, but it seems like that tour in part was him realizing that as he lived his life more authentically as an out queer man, that there were going to be fans of his that were lost, and this was kind of his last hoorah as a straight guy. And there are a lot of hints that Eras Tour is kind of something similar for Taylor. Now, let's talk about the most controversial thing that shouldn't be controversial, Gaylorism. Before we get started, Gaylor is a shorthand for anybody who believes that Taylor is a part of the LGBTQ community. It's just shorter to say than anything else. It doesn't necessarily mean that people think she's a lesbian. It just means a lot of people think that she's LGBTQ. Now, there's a phenomenon which happens with a very small subset of very aggressively, virulently bigoted fans of Taylor's, wherein if you even suggest that she's not a perfectly straight queen who's telling us the literal and honest truth all the time, you get doxxed and threatened in an aggressive way. If your problematic fave was straight, you wouldn't have to go through measures like that to prove it. And I'm sure there's people out there, but the prologue! That is not what the 1989 prologue meant. Let's very briefly discuss prologue prolapse, or the moment at which Taylor's most virulently bigoted fans showed everyone their collective inflamed assholes. You cannot take a paragraph that is about the media and cherry pick a single line out of it and then be like, see Gaylor, she hates you. And if you could do that, the lines right before that were about the media speculating about her heterosexual relationships. So are you carrying the same energy for people that are talking about her heterosexual relationships? Or are you just taking one line that you think fits your agenda and then utilizing it as a weapon against people who do not have anything to do with you? That is not how paragraphs work. You cannot cafeteria cherry pick what you want to eat out of it and throw out the rest. Even if it was meant to refer to her fans, and it's not, it criticizes the speculation and the sexualization of both her female and male relationships. But it's not intended to be directed at us, right? Because she encourages the fans to speculate. And I've never seen a Hetler send a death threat to any of the really egregious people that say disgusting things about what Taylor and Travis get up to in bed. And whenever this discussion comes up, there's always, well, some of the Gaylors go too far. Okay, some of literally every segment of Taylor's fans go too far. If you're only focusing on the ones that think Taylor is queer, you don't care about Taylor. You care about queer bashing. And you really need to look into that. As a lesbian who spent 20 years in the closet dating men because it gave me more safety and more income in a career field that was hostile to me, it is impossible to ignore the myriad ways that Taylor signals to us that she is not straight. The subtext of her lyrics, the lyrics that she tells us to look at time and time and time again, above anything else, above what the media says, above literally anything else, Taylor says, look at the lyrics. The subtext of the lyrics says she's not straight. As a gay person who does insanely close readings of all of Taylor's lyrics to analyze her, the only way that I can ignore all of the signs is if I put blinders on and pretend that Taylor is also an idiot. So many people will connect Taylor's lyrics to all sorts of obscure things and everybody's like, oh yeah, that sounds good. But the moment you infer that she knows what a hairpin drop is, people are like, oh, Taylor doesn't know how to use Google. She doesn't know anything. I don't know what that is, so Taylor doesn't know what that is. Taylor is insanely well read, and not only that, she knows every sapphic in Hollywood worth knowing. If she didn't know what the words meant when she wrote the songs, someone gay will have heard the songs before they come out. Someone would have caught that. And especially with hairpin, she did the hairpin drop and people were like, oh, I'm sure she didn't know what that meant. But then she goes again and she uses hairpin trigger to reinforce, oh yeah, I use this word deliberately. I know what a hairpin is. I know what a hairpin means. When you close read the subtext in her lyrics, the subtext is queer. When you look into a lot of the imagery that Taylor is using, a lot of the imagery that she's using is historically associated with Sapphic people. Taylor knows what she is doing with her lyrics. And occasionally when I say something like, oh yeah, Taylor uses this symbol is queer, somebody will be like, well, Halsey uses that symbol. It's so interesting to me that nearly almost every time that happens, the other artist that is also using that symbol is also out as queer, if not queer flagging heavily. Is there one piece of evidence that is a big smoking pew-pew that proves she's not straight? No, because like I said, for half of this video, she has this image that she needs to maintain to continue to make money. Is she out enough for the large majority of the lesbians in the world to recognize it? I'd say so. I think at this point, if I were to collect all of the evidence together, there would be hundreds of pieces of circumstantial evidence. And a lot of these pieces of circumstantial evidence are things that, like, the only way hetlers can counter them is by saying, well, I'm sure Taylor didn't know that was gay. You're making that assertion for like 100 different things. I'm sure Taylor didn't understand all of these 100 things, even though she understands every other thing that she's doing. The only way you can acknowledge Taylor as a straight woman is if you also close your eyes and your ears and don't pay attention to anything. I'm sorry. I'm sick of pretending like it is some goddamn stretch that this woman might also like girls. I don't give a f about muses. I don't speculate what she's doing about anything else. But her being queer is an integral part of who she is as a human. And as someone who has suppressed my own queerness for like 20 years, I know that more than any. And I'm not going to humor any idiots down below in the comments that try to pull bull. If you show that you did not listen to anything that I said in this video and you just want to talk off at the mouth because you're terrified that your problematic fave isn't as straight as you think she is, because you're like, oh, well, what does that mean for me? I feel a lot like Taylor. Does that mean I'm a lesbian too? And like, here's the thing. I know what it is. I know the large majority of the hetlers out there who want to attack us for thinking that she's queer are also in the closet in denial about it themselves. Because, oh my God, Taylor can't be queer because Taylor's queer, I'm queer. Good, enjoy it. This video ended angrier than I expected, but let's see how it goes.